Well, good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you on a sunny day now. Finally, I think spring has almost arrived, which means it will have snow next week. But that's the way it goes. Welcome to this edition, the May edition of the 2018 Lunchtime Expeditions. This is our 19th year. That's hard to believe, and so good to see so many new faces as well as I always want to say old faces, and that's never good. So, as well as returning guests here for us today. As I think most of you know, I'm Chuck Preston. I'm the senior curator here at the Draper Natural History Museum at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. And today you're stuck with me all day. I get to introduce myself. So let me, I'll probably forget something. But let me remind you, this is a good time to turn off your electronic devices so we won't get buzzes and bells and whistles. And whistles I like, actually, but depending. Well, I think, again, most of you know me and have seen me over the years. I've been here 20 years now at the center. Before I came here really was recruited to create the Draper Natural History Museum with a whole lot of other people that worked smarter and harder than I did, but I got the chance to lead this group from exhibit designers from New York and fabricators from Michigan and folks from all over the country, really, engineers from San Francisco all over to create the Draper Natural History Museum, and it was really an opportunity of a lifetime for me. Prior to that, for 8.5 years, I was at the Denver Museum of Natural History, where I was the curator of birds and mammals and chairman of the Department of Zoology for most of that time there. And before that, I was actually a tenured associate professor of biology and wildlife management at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I won't go too far back beyond that, but my career now, I really realize, has spanned more than 44, 45 years, something like that. I started out really as an interpretive naturalist with the U.S. Forest Service many years ago as a seasonal, and then after my undergraduate degree worked at a small museum, relatively small museum, actually about the same size as this one in Little Rock, Arkansas, the Arkansas Museum of Science and History. Went to graduate school and was the graduate curator of zoology for several years during my master's and PhD work there. And I'm pretty classically trained, as most of you know, as a wildlife ecologist and work on a lot of different kind of animals. And over the years, I've published on everything from salamanders and frogs to small mammals and a lot of raptors. I focus a lot on raptors, and that's what brings us to today's talk. I focus a lot on raptors because they're a great window to the world, no matter what ecosystem or what place you're studying. Raptors seem to be among the most obvious animals, sort of models to look at to determine what's going on in that system. You can usually identify prey remains from raptors where you can't from lots of other animals. And so they give you a little bit more of a window into the world that you're interested in. And my training as a sort of a systems ecologist is trying to understand broad ecosystems. And if you think of them, and I always have, I thought of an ecosystem as a tapestry that's, you know what tapestries are. They're full of all of these different colored threads, and they weave in and they weave out, but they're all connected with one another. And if you start pulling one thread out, the tapestry starts to sort of fall apart. And so I'm interested in all of those little elements of the tapestry, and that's what I'm going to talk to, and that's the essence of what ecology really is, which leads then into conservation biology and wildlife management and those sorts of things. So today, I'm going to talk about a big tapestry that we call the Sagebrush steppe, and about a couple of key players, key threads in there in the Sagebrush steppe, the golden eagle, and in this case, in the Bighorn Basin, the lowly but pervasive cottontail rabbit. Actually, two different species of cottontails, and we'll talk about that. So we're really talking about a couple of different Western icons here. I mean, the center of the West here and the Draper itself, we focus on the American West, right? Well, these are two fundamental icons of the American West, the golden eagle and the sagebrush steppe. So this is the sagebrush steppe. It's one of those maligned places that a lot of people, as you know, call wasteland. Oh, that's the way, if I had hair, it would stand up. When people call this a wasteland, because this is no less a wilderness, no less an intact ecosystem in some places at least, than those beautiful forests we see in the Rocky Mountains, and the meadows that are back in the backcountry somewhere. They're more isolated perhaps than the sagebrush steppe, or at least the sagebrush steppe that we drive by. But if you start walking back, it's just like Yellowstone National Park. If you go out in the Bighorn Basin, you start walking back a half mile, even a half mile from most roads, you've got a wilderness area there, and it's an intact native ecosystem. And in fact, this was the largest ecosystem, the most expansive ecosystem in North America, in Western North America, that we had. But now it is in serious decline, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The cool thing about Wyoming is, and Bighorn Basin in particular, but especially just broadly Wyoming, is that we have some of the best, most intact sagebrush steppe. That's why so much of the conversation about sage grouse and sagebrush centers right here in Wyoming, and we've led. It's a new challenge these days. I won't get into the politics of it today, although that's a great one for some future talks we have this summer coming up. But now, once we thought we had a great plan in place, and now it looks like we may be revisiting that plan for sagebrush. But the point is that in Wyoming, and this is something I think we can be very proud of, no matter what happens from this point forth, that it was the different stakeholders in Wyoming, from the ranchers and other landowners to the politicians, to conservationists, to wildlife managers, all looking at this sagebrush system and say, you know, it is important. Even if the only reason we're looking at it is because sage grouse and we don't want to put them on the endangered species list, this environment is important. And let's all get together and find a good compromise that we can all live with. And Wyoming led that charge, so I'm very proud of that. And we're going to talk about this sagebrush system because it is, for folks who are, and a lot of our guests that come through every year on their way to Yellowstone, to and from Yellowstone, and maybe seeing some of this even in that area between, say, the southern part of Yellowstone and Jackson, that nice big, in fact, you could see the airport from it. You're driving through a sagebrush steppe area there, but there's not many of these sagebrush steppe areas left intact in the American West at all, but Wyoming's got the biggest stretch of them. But it's easy to drive by and say wasteland or nothing interesting happening there. But the fact is that there's a lot happening out here, and I won't go through every little detail here on this slide. This is something put together by Audubon Rockies. That's a poster, and we use it occasionally in classes, teaching classes and other things, but it highlights some of the species that are critical to the sagebrush steppe, and many of them are obligates. That means, and you'll hear that a couple of other times, it means that they are limited to living in this sagebrush environment. I'll define sagebrush steppe here. Now's a good time to do that, because we know that when I talk about sagebrush steppe, we're talking about landscapes that are dominated by sagebrush. The steppe part, S-T-E-P-P-E, is the grasslands, the grasses. It's generally this gently rolling or relatively flat environment dominated by sagebrush, but with plenty of different grasses, and all of those are critical to supporting wildlife like pronghorn and even jackrabbits and badgers and horned lizards, or in Texas you'd call them horny toads, right, Penny? Yeah. And rabbit brush and the sagebrush and several different raptor species, and lots more going on in here. So we're going to highlight some of those in a bit. But the point is, this is really an intricate system that is an integrated system where every piece, just like in your computer, if you start opening up your computer and tearing out wires, or maybe opening the hood of your car, taking that little blue wire seems out of place, I'll just take that out, something bad could happen. This is the sagebrush steppe area that I know. I also know the brown, the same place if you'd go out there a couple of months ago now, or even a month ago. It would be brown, pretty colorless. You'd think everything is dead. But this place comes alive. And that's what we miss sometimes. If you're not out there and you haven't strolled through here, and with every step you're smelling fresh sagebrush, just filling your nostrils with that unique, pungent odor. and you see these fields of wildflowers as well. They may be only up for a couple of weeks at a time, and they may not come up every year, depending on the moisture level and lots of other things. But this is the sagebrush steppe that I remember in the middle of winter, look back on and see this. So let's talk about some of those little creatures that fit in here before we talk about my favorite one these days, and that's the golden eagle, of course. Horned lizard here. Horned lizard eats what? Do you know? Ants. There you go. Primarily ants. And so what? Well, this little horned lizard eating ants changes the entire, or at least influences, the entire makeup of the invertebrate community in a sagebrush steppe system like this. This is a short-horned lizard. This is, well, it's me, but it's also a bull snake that is one of the few snakes that we have. We only have 3 species, really, that call this sagebrush steppe area home in the Bighorn Basin, and the bull snake is one of those, the other 2 being the wandering garter snake or western garter snake, and one other I'll show you here in just a minute. My favorite, Bonnie's least favorite, right? Excuse me. Bull snake and other species, primarily a rodent eater, and in so doing, helps structure, believe it or not, that rodent community in here. Non-poisonous, you know that, or I wouldn't be handling it quite that way. You see the door flung open on our old blue, the old 1987, I think, Suburban that we've used for a field vehicle. It's sort of semi-retired right now, by the way. I may be that in another year or 2. We'll see. This is one of my favorites, actually, but not so much for a lot of our team runs into this when we're in the field a good deal. This is, of course, the western or the prairie rattlesnake, relatively common in areas here, but one of the smaller rattlesnakes at full length, you're looking at 3 to maybe 3.5 feet for the most part. But yes, possibly very dangerous. Another rodent eater, but lives in slightly different areas than the bull snake and hunts at different times, and so they sort of partition the resources in a way there. Of course, the sage grouse has become the poster child, I guess, or the poster animal for the sagebrush steppe, and for good reason. It's because this species has declined. It was very common throughout the West, throughout the sagebrush country in the West, and has declined precipitously over the last few decades. Wyoming, again, one of its last great strongholds, frankly, and even declining here, too, in some places. Hopefully we'll work again on this and continue to work on this sagebrush plan, because it's often been touted as an umbrella species. You know what that means? Grizzly bear is also umbrella species. But the concept of an umbrella species is a little weak in there, as an ecologist, I'll say, in that just because you're protecting this one species doesn't necessarily mean it benefits everything else. However, I think the concept is still valid, and we're going to talk about it with the golden eagles in a bit, because generally speaking, these umbrella species, if they're doing well, then primarily the productivity and the quality of the habitat is doing pretty well. So the sage grouse became famous, I guess, for a lot of people that don't hunt sage grouse. Became famous because of this iconic status as the next species that may be placed on the endangered species list. We're hoping that it won't be, but we're hoping that this sagebrush steppe will be, and this plan will be implemented down the road. Lark bunting is a bird that, I don't know if you see it or you recognize it often. It's interesting in itself, looking at the pattern here, the black and white. This is the male, of course, flying over, although you can't see what it is here, that blue haze in the background. This is penstemon that lives in that blooms in the sagebrush steppe. But I wanted to point out that lark bunting because it provides you with a really good example of adaptation to a specific kind of environment. Now, as you know, most birds in the breeding season get up in the tree and they sing from the highest part of the tree because they're announcing their territory and they're trying to find a mate, attracting that mate with all they've got. How many trees are there in the sagebrush steppe system? Not much. So what do? Well, if you're a bird like the lark bunting and you want to sing to attract a mate, sometimes you'll get on top of a sagebrush. That's not so effective. But what they do is fly high, straight up, and then they flutter down, and as they're fluttering down, they sing that amazing, really very melodic song. I am indebted, by the way, and now's a good time to point it out, I'm indebted to a lot of photographers, but primarily in this presentation, the better photographs, there are a couple of mine, but the better photographs in here are from Nick Sharavella from Moose Jaw Bravo Photography. Nick was also a research assistant with us over the last 3 years on our Golden Eagle project, and I just kind of turned him loose this last year especially to capture as many photographs to present not just about golden eagles but about this entire system. And this is one of his photographs of a sage thrasher. Very good. Yeah, another obligate, by the way. You don't find sage thrashers living away from sagebrush. This is a species that requires and depends on sagebrush for a living. These guys. Some of my favorites, there's one adult. Looks like that adult is being bullied by several of its young. Burrowing owls, real opportunistic species, of course. They are pretty much limited to where prairie dogs are or have been. In the sagebrush steppe, it's primarily white-tailed prairie dogs that we'll see in a bit. But this is one little family that we've been watching for the last several years in one area. Here's another raptor that is one of my favorites, and you don't think of it in the sagebrush steppe, this kind of arid environment. You think of a marsh hawk living in wet, marshy areas. Well, believe it or not, there are some wet, marshy areas, but there are also tall grasses in the sagebrush steppe area in some periphery. This is a ground nesting species, and this is what used to be called the marsh hawk is the northern harrier, you see the young here in the nest. Ravens have been increasing, common ravens increasing, and in fact probably one of the major predators on sage grouse eggs and young particularly, probably have been increasing. I don't know if I said decreasing, I meant increasing if I said decreasing. Increasing in the sagebrush steppe, in our area in the Bighorn Basin, probably in part because of open dump sites that we have out there, and more people and more food to eat from people maybe either careless or again, these open dump sites. And we're seeing them increase in a lot of areas in the West, usually associated with these dump sites, just give them that little bit of extra that allow them to increase the way they have. There's a native species, certainly, but they are increasing beyond historical numbers. One of my favorites, a badger. You don't see them very often, but they certainly make themselves well known if you see them closely. Badger, one of the small carnivores in the area, along with coyotes, of course, another part of this system that has its place. And even though it irritates people a lot sometimes, especially near dwellings, but the coyote is a critical element in this system. And we can't forget the ungulates. More and more we're learning about ungulates migrating from the Yellowstone Plateau all the way into the Bighorn Basin in the eastern part of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. But also we have resident herds that most people don't think about, and certainly I didn't see even 20 years ago when I was here, but we're seeing more and more resident herds, and we're seeing calving grounds out here in the middle of the Bighorn Basin, the Oregon Basin even in some places. And pronghorn, of course, another species we'll talk a little bit more about soon. But we really want to talk about, the golden eagle here, and it has emerged as a species of maybe not special concern in terms of being endangered. It's certainly a protected species from the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, the Migratory Bird Act Treaty, but it has emerged as a species of real concern because of the rapid changes that Western environments are seeing, and that includes the sagebrush steppe, but other areas as well. Now, sagebrush steppe is being changed by a lot of things we'll see in a bit, but the golden eagle is not only a species of concern in itself, but it also, and what my interest initially was drawn to, other than, and don't repeat this is just for you to hear, so don't take it out of here, it's a really cool species to work with. Very neat. But it is also a window, as I mentioned before, into this world, because it's the apex predator, really. It's the top predator in this system for most of the year. And it reaches a pretty good population here in the Bighorn Basin. And its primary prey, and we'll talk more about this, is the cottontail. And there are two species of cottontail, the desert and mountain cottontail, that actually can coexist in the Bighorn Basin. The desert cottontail is more common. They're almost impossible to tell apart in the field, but they do have slightly different biologies in here. And the story today, really, I'm going to talk about is this predator-prey dynamic of these two species. I mentioned that they are a window into this changing environment, and believe me, it is changing. Here's a good example of cheatgrass, all the pink stuff you see sort of invading a little bit here. This is cheatgrass, and it can actually change an environment drastically, profoundly, eliminating native habitat as it moves forth. It's a species that cures. It was introduced because it's a food for cattle early in the year. It greens up very early, but it also cures very early. Becomes very dry when you still have some greenery around it. And that dry grass makes a great fuel for fire, even naturally caused fires. When it burns everything around it, including the sagebrush, lends that fire because it builds that fuel. And then guess what replaces it? More cheatgrass. That's right, because it's a fire-adapted species in there. And it has completely changed the nature of sagebrush steppe in about 2/3 of the Great Basin area west of us. Also, of course, we're seeing increasing recreation, and I'm not here to say, oh, gee, stay out of these areas. I'm saying let's use these areas responsibly and recognize they have value and treat them like they have value in here. And we're seeing increased, it's a numbers game. When 3 or 4 people were out on ATVs or bicycles, mountain bikes, or even hiking, not a big deal. Now multiply that by 10 and 20 and 30 as we're seeing now. Richard Jones is in the back. Richard's one of our pilot for this research, and he was the first one that pointed out to me what he was seeing year in and year out was more and more spaghetti trails of these ATVs and in some cases mountain bike trails increasing. Again, not saying don't use it. This is a multiple use landscape. Nothing wrong with that. It's about valuing it, and just like we do in our own homes and our own lives, is being a good steward of what we've got out there. And of course, this is happening throughout a lot of the West. Not so much in our area, although we do see slow creep of development. It has an impact. Not saying we can't develop anything, saying let's do things in a smart way. So this is our study site. You see a little polygon around Cody. That's a study site of about 250,000 hectares, something like that we have been studying over the last 10 years, looking at primarily at golden eagles to get a better sense of this system. And this is very briefly some of our research team over the years. This was just a snapshot, literally in time, in 2015, when we were drawing blood and doing a number of other things here. From left to right, I'll go through these folks. Nathan Horton. He's the one with the unchanging countenance. Bonnie Smith there, you see, defiant as always. Melissa, I'm not sure what Melissa's thinking there. Richard, as affable as ever. Me, just absolutely. Oh, where's my cap? I got to put my cap on here. Just so you know it's me. There we go. I got the cap. Destin Harrell, biologist with the Bureau of Land Management. Nick Charavella, I mentioned before, is our photographer, but also a climber. Helps rappel, or was doing most of the rappelling over the last few years in the nest, and a research assistant. Boy, we're doing lots of things out there. I'm not going to go over this in detail, but you see Richard over in the lower right-hand corner is our pilot, again, doing initial surveys for golden eagle nests every year, see what status they're in. We rappel into those nests, and we collect information and blood and other things and band individual birds, and we monitor them. That Nate and I down at the bottom here just banding. I don't know if we've just banded or about to band. We just captured these birds, about to band them and release them. But also we have a host of volunteers, and I thought this was a great project to an opportunity to get the community involved in science. So these are our citizen scientists. We call them the Golden Eagle Posse. This is just a few of them. There are many more here, and they help us monitor the different nest sites, document them. This year we're going to be documenting some characteristics of nest sites, even help with nighttime roadside surveys. But this is the real crux of what we're talking about today. The golden eagle, this is a golden eagle and young. Looks like she's about to, the parent is about to feed the young some, and he's very interested. Looks like. I say he because he looks so eager there and aggressive. Although the females often can be more aggressive than the males in this age. But this is pretty typical nest site that Nick Charavella captured. And this one, we're primarily, what I want to talk about today with all the things we've studied, I really want to focus on a couple of things, and that is the diet and reproduction. So here's how we assess diet. We go into those nests, rappel into them, and find materials down under them at a certain distance from the nest, and we collect them, we bring them into our lab, we compare them with the reference specimens we have if we need to, and we identify what the heck we've got there. This is a typical haul from one nest at the end of a season. This year, by the way, we're going to increase that. We're going to put cameras in nests where we have authority to do that, and see if we can also measure prey delivery as well as what's left behind, and see how they jive, see if we're really catching everything we think we are. This is a result, primary result of, and this is I think over 9 years averaged. Over those 9 years, you see that blue dominates the diet. That blue, the cottontails. You see the lighter blue there is all birds together, lumped together. We have a small sliver of pronghorn fawns and reptiles and other mammals, and then white-tailed jackrabbits. So the three primary prey, and I hate to say three primary because there's really only one primary, and that's cottontails. But then we have pronghorn and white-tailed jackrabbits as sort of secondary prey items in here. But the point is, cottontails are dominant. We didn't expect that because golden eagles are very versatile. They can take a wide range of everything from adult pronghorn and deer to coyotes and foxes and sheep, although we didn't see. I think we found one sheep remained in one nest here. Sage grouse was another thing we thought we'd see more of, but at least during the nesting season, they're not taking many sage grouse here. So when you find out what primary prey is, you want to say, well, what's going on with that prey? What's the nature of that prey? What's the character? We wanted to know abundance, and we wanted to know the stability. And as you can see, there's no stability here. But there is a pattern. If you look at it, look from peak to peak or valley to valley, and you'll count about 6 to 8 years between low and low or high and high. That defines a cycle that has never really been discussed or understood or even really documented. Now we get this data over a period of almost, well, more than 30 years now from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. They maintain cottontail hunter bag records. So the next question is, well, is that really what's going on out there? This is just for our region, by the way, the Bighorn Basin. So we do, and we've only started in 2009, but we run nighttime spotlight transects to figure out how things vary from year to year, and we found that this pattern holds for us as well. In those years where we've studied it and we have these data, they match up. The relationship, the correlation is more than 99%. So it's incredibly close in here. So cottontail cycle, they're not stable. So that leads to a question. If they're the primary prey, how do eagles respond when these this one primary species declines? One hypothesis is that, well, they'll just switch to alternate prey. There's lots of other things to eat out there. And then they'll maintain their reproductive output that way. So reproduction should stay stable. Or they may try to maintain that diet of cottontails, and because of that, their reproductive output is reduced. There are also variations of these two, but these are two just to give you an idea how we think about those sorts of things. So let's see what happens. Oh, nothing. Ah, there we go. Okay, so we look at on the axis, the vertical axis there, we have what's called a standardized diet breadth. It's just a measure of the breadth, the diversity of diet that golden eagles are eating during a particular year in this case. And we're comparing that with cottontails harvested per hunter day, that same figure you saw before. And the pattern's pretty clear, and it is statistically significant. And that is that when cottontails are low, breadth is high. They are eating more alternate prey. So, can they maintain that reproductive output? Nope. See this? Same thing on the bottom of the axis. There's cottontails harvested per hunter day. Now the vertical axis is golden eagle reproductive rate. And you see you've got the opposite direction here of the line, meaning that when cottontails are low, reproduction is low. They do switch. So here's the take-home message. They do switch prey to some extent. They use alternate prey, but it's not enough to compensate for the loss of those cottontails. So as cottontails go, so goes golden eagle reproduction in the Bighorn Basin. Now that's different from a lot of different areas across it. You'd think, oh, well, that's pretty straightforward. I guess that's what happens everywhere. Nope. Every different kind of study area is finding slightly different things because no two areas are exactly alike. One size doesn't fit all. So what are the conservation implications here if you're looking, for example, at golden eagles, again, which are not endangered at this point, would kind of like to get ahead of any crisis. The conservation implication is pretty simple. If you want to stabilize or increase reproduction, you either support the primary prey, that is, improve or at least maintain cottontail habitat, or you diversify the prey base. And in this case, that would mean primarily white-tailed jackrabbits and white-tailed prairie dogs. Now, white-tailed prairie dogs particularly, and for that matter jackrabbits to a point, to boost those populations may not be socially acceptable. So you have to, not in every place anyway. So you balance, it's always a balancing act. Humans are part of this equation too, and you do that. But there are ways, again, if you approach things systematically, where I think you can get a win-win kind of a situation. This is sort of one of the take-home lessons. Again, this is just a tiny part of our overall study, but a part of it. Now, what the heck does this mean? Oh, I remember now. This is just to give you a quick idea about how things vary over the time. If you look at the left series of bars, that's territory occupancy. That means breeding birds in place in a territory, not necessarily breeding. The success bars in the middle, that is the nesting success. Success means a pair of eagles that year brought off at least one young. And productivity, well, that's a measure of how many young were brought off per breeding pair. Okay, so those are the three measures here. I'm just going to run through this real quickly. Within each series, you've got a blue bar, a red bar, and I guess it's kind of lime green, huh? Who's my color expert? We'll figure that one out. At any rate, the blue bar is the high end of what we found over the last 9-10 years. The red bar is the mean or the average, and the right bar is the lowest that we've found. So for occupancy, we vary. Our average, by the way, is about 82-83%, something like that. And you can see how it varies from time to time. There's a pretty good variation there. It's not consistent from year to year. These territories, and we have about 83 of them that we've identified, thanks to Richard identifying most of them early on from the air. We have about 83 territories that we've identified, and in a given year, may have only 80% of those that are actually occupied and defended by a pair, whether they breed or not. Success, our mean success is just under 60%, but it varies quite a bit. More than 85%, and a low of just about 30, I think about 30% roughly. Productivity, our high was 1.34 young produced per breeding pair. For every breeding pair, you produced less than 2, but more than 1 eaglet. The mean is actually about 0.8 something, and the low is way down. You see in those bad years, and these are bad rabbit years, that's why that graph is so strong, the relationship is so strong. In a bad rabbit year, we produce less than 0.3, 33% of breeding pairs produce any young at all in there, and they just produce one. So there you go. So I just wanted to compare this just to see, and again, I won't go through all the detail on all of these, but each graph is the same, so you can interpret the same here. Just a few quick remarks. Yellowstone National Park occupancy is almost always 100%. Now, they only have about 18 nests that they're following up there, and we work collaboratively with all of these sites. There's about 100% every year. All of their territories are filled with breeding pairs. But look at their success compared to the Bighorn Basin. Much lower. You don't even see that lime green line or bar. It's because it's zero. Some years they have absolutely zero nesting success. Same thing with productivity, lower than ours, quite a bit lower as a matter of fact, even their highest. And their mean is quite a bit lower than ours, and their lowest is producing, of course, nothing at all. Livingston, Montana, this is the old Craighead site that now the new Craighead, Derek Craighead and his group, with Ross Crandall leading it, are studying. Again, you see occupancy much better than ours. You see the success rate a little bit lower than ours, but pretty close. The mean is, in fact, just about what ours is, maybe a little bit above. The productivity doesn't quite reach as high as ours. The average, though, is a little bit lower, but the lowest is not quite as low as ours. So they're a little bit more stable, just lower overall. And just one other example, again, I've got about 10 of these, but I'm not going to go through any other than this one. This is Denali National Park, just to look at something really different. And you see, by the way, the species that I've listed here are their primary prey in those areas. So in our area, cottontail jackrabbit pronghorn, marmot and dusky grouse in Yellowstone, jackrabbit, marmot, cottontail in Livingston, snowshoe hare and ptarmigan in Denali National Park. And again, you see their occupancy is closer to ours. It varies quite a bit. The success is, in general, lower than ours. But look at the productivity. In good years, their productivity is much higher, but in bad years, their productivity is zero, much less. Now, so what does all of this mean? Again, it means one size doesn't fit all, right? That, in fact, if you really want to understand populations of golden eagles and these other species, you have to look at local areas. You can't just apply what you found out in Denali to Bighorn Basin or in Yellowstone. On the other hand, looking at all of these together, and this is what's really exciting to me, because scientists are doing something, ecologists particularly, are doing something we have not excuse me, done well in the past. And that is we're collaborating, we're networking more. And so, yes, Bighorn Basin has its own specifics. But if we look at all of these areas across the western United States, we get the big picture of, well, are eagles doing well or not? Depends on where you're looking at, but we can see different trends that are continent-wide. It really is, it may not sound really exciting to you, but for us in this field, it really is exciting. The key is to standardize our methods, and that's what we're working on now, to create this continent-wide database that gives managers and political leaders, for that matter, policymakers, the best information possible. Just one little anecdote here. One of the other things that we're studying is the movements of golden eagles. We've put radio tags, or excuse me, satellite tags on a few individuals, 4 of them all together. These are birds that fledged, that were hatched in one of our nests. Fish and Wildlife Service had the money for some of these satellite transmitters, and so we worked with them and caught the birds, and they put transmitters on 4 of our birds. 2 of those birds sadly are dead now. One of them died the first year, and it was killed by another eagle. There's a long story in how we found it, but we got the coordinates. We went, found the carcass on the ground. We got permission. It was on private land. And by the way, and I hate to make an aside, but let me do this before I forget it. We are so indebted to not only the public land administrators like BLM and the state and Bureau of Reclamation in a couple of places, but also the private landowners have worked with us very much, and we try to obviously respect their property rights and everything else there, but it's been a nice relationship with those private landowners. In this case, we found a carcass of this golden eagle, and we looked up and saw in a huge cottonwood tree. Most of our nests, by the way, are in cliffsides in our study area. This was south of Meeteetse. Found a big golden eagle nest with 2 young eagles and 2 adults tending it. And we found this dead eagle only about 20 meters from that tree. and sent it in through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for necropsy, and found out that it had trauma that would be similar to a fight with another eagle. It didn't win, and these eagles can be very territorial. The second one lived 4 full years, almost 4 full years. We just found it last week. Nate Horton and Corey Anko, our assistant curator, went out and found the bird from the coordinates that we got from the satellite transmitter, and it may be a similar situation. It looks like it was within a half mile of a territorial eagle pair, and it may have just crossed the wrong place at the wrong time. But that means we still have 2 of our babies out there, and this gives you some, I don't know how well you can see this. Well, you can see the red dots pretty well. This is over a period of December November, December, about a month-long period in 2017, just to give you an idea how these birds move around. Now, this is a bird this one was banded and tagged from a nest just north of Powell on BLM land, that one. And since then, it's been all over the country. This one's been down to Casper, but over the last couple of years, it's been hanging around this area. And you see it's up north of Red Lodge, as you see there, between Red Lodge and Roscoe, you know where that is in Montana. And this is our Montana bird that's been hanging out. And we expect it to begin breeding this next year. It usually takes 5 years before a bird is ready to become an adult breeding bird. So it's hanging out there. And the coolest thing, I got to show you this last slide. The coolest thing is, you know, we never get to see these birds again, right? Unless we trap them again. But this one was hanging out around a carcass that was next to the road, and one of the roads, just next to the highway, in a fence line near Red Lodge. And a biologist up there I've been in touch with for a while, who works for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, sent a photo. He didn't know what we had or anything else, so he took a photograph of a bird he saw. This one. See the transmitter, the little aerial coming out? That's our bird. That's our little male that came out of that nest near Powell, and he snapped this photograph, and he sent out a bulletin and said, does anybody know who this bird is? We got together with Fish and Wildlife Service, who's tracking the bird, and identified it as our baby here. So he sent me this photograph. Kind of neat when you see your children all grown up almost. Well, I can't leave without promoting our new exhibition coming up. Monarch of the Skies will certainly showcase a lot of our own research. I mean, that's what I think a top-tier museum does. We showcase our own work that knowledge that we've created with our team here. But it also will highlight some of these other studies I talked about, how they all match together, and have a lot of fun stuff in there too, for like the big silhouette. You can compare yourself. You can tell it for the kids, but then you can sneak in there and do it too. And compare yourself to a big 7-foot wingspan of a large female eagle. We'll have an articulated skeleton there. Those are always kind of fun to see how these pieces fit together, and then in that, use it as a way to discuss how eagles are different than a lot of other birds. And we have an ecology and natural history section. We have a sort of a science section. So how do we know? Science is a way of knowing about these things. We'll have food remains, prey remains. I know you were excited about that when you saw those disgusting things on the table. That'll be in a case in there. We'll talk about those things, and you can identify different things. So I won't go through all of it, but I hope you're excited about that. We'll open to the public on the 10th. We do have, if you're a member, we'll have a members opening on the 8th of June. 8th of June. And for those of you, I know we have a few folks in the media. We'll have a media preview that we'll be sending out a notice here soon. That'll be on the 7th of June. So we're looking forward to that. And it's not just about the ecology and the conservation and the science about golden, or the ecological science about golden eagles. It also covers this and that's why it's so neat. It's a multidisciplinary exhibition, really bringing cultural and in this case archaeological information to bear and give you a broader perspective on what's going on. Here's Bonnie Smith. You recognize Bonnie down at the bottom here, pointing out some of the rock art, and she's been working very hard at not only identifying and documenting some of these rock art sites that have thunderbirds that's sort of related to the golden eagle and to the relationship with native people for many, many generations, and golden eagles. But she's also been active in finding these eagle traps that Native Americans used in our area specifically. They couldn't dig into the ground very well, so they built up these rock traps, and she'll tell you more about that later. She's going to give a talk. Bonnie's at September, is your, I can't remember, November, about some of her work over here. And in the meantime, we'll have Larry Lohendorf also talking about some rock art and other sacred sites. So this is a really exciting part of our exhibition. And also Rebecca and Bonnie is a co-curator of the exhibition, and so is Rebecca. So the three of us work together on these things. Rebecca West, you know, is the Plains Indian Museum curator, and she's helped us with some of the materials, the contemporary and the older materials from the Plains Indian collection that relate to eagles in one way or another. And we'll be rotating some of those artifacts within the exhibition over time. So we're thrilled. It's been a wonderful team effort here involving so much of the center in one way or another, and we're anxious to open that and highlight not just our research and our science and what's going on with golden eagles in a biological sense, but also through rock art and archaeology and Plains Indian ethnography. Makes it, I think, a sort of a multiple portals for a lot of folks with different interests. And I have to end with this, of course, because as we all know, birds of prey know they're cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let me stand over here like I usually do and say, well, Chuck, will you entertain any questions? Well, it depends. Of course, yes.
A little more anthropological, but two-part question on the goldens. Have they been used in modern times at all by any Southern hunter groups? And is there any evidence anthropologically of the indigenous people in North America using any of the raptors for hunting as they have in Asia and places like that?
You know, I'm not really sure about the second question. I don't know of any specific information on Native Americans, as many other indigenous folks used raptors for hunting. Maybe some of you know that. But absolutely, your first question, there's evidence that, or there are many falconers who are able to use golden eagles as they have to be very well trained and advanced in what they do, because it is a big, dangerous animal. But yes, they are used in falconry. And of course, you may know of the Kazakhstani people and others in different parts of the world who use golden eagles to hunt everything from wolves to foxes to reindeer, one place or another. I have time for, I think, two more questions, if I've got this. Yes, Linda. Not really. You know, we're documenting nests, other raptor nests that we see. And I'm glad you asked that question, because we've been focused so much on the golden eagle, and we wanted to get that story and understand it so we can use that as in science, we often talk about a research platform. We've built that platform so we know enough about that system, and now it's time to sort of extend that platform. Corey Anko, our new, I say new, I shouldn't say that anymore. He's been with us for more than, almost a year now. It will be 9 months. August last year. Corey is going to spearhead some new projects, sort of playing off of our. We're going to continue doing a lot of the monitoring work, but we're going to extend off that. The bald eagles, of course, there are not that many nesting in our area. We do have quite a big wintering group that come down and spend the winter here, and that's one of the things that I'd love to take a look at, especially with carcass cams and others, and look at that relationship between bald and golden eagles under different circumstances during the winter. Mm-hmm. Sure.
nest here and how to take a site.
Boy, Neil's got the mind of a scientist. I knew that. But his question, if you didn't hear it, is when in our cottontail cycles, when we have a dip, for example, or an increase, is it the same in other places nearby? We know we have good data for Wyoming, all of Wyoming, and in fact, it seems like what happens in our Bighorn Basin area is on the same schedule as almost every place else in Wyoming. However, you're onto something there, because in other areas, farther north, further south, in the mountains, slightly different habitats, there may be a different dynamic there, and that doesn't affect the breeding birds at all, because they're kind of tied to the territory. But during the winter, that's why we see shifts of numbers of birds. Some of you participate, I know, in the eagle count, the winter eagle count. Valuable, another citizen science project, really a valuable tool, because that golden eagle, or that eagle count, raptor count really is what it's become, gives us a fairly consistent view. It's collected under consistent conditions, consistent view winter to winter, snapshot in time, but still winter to winter, on the non-breeding population. Most of our birds are resident birds. They live here year-round, but they're joined in the winter by these others. So in good rabbit years, we have more eagles come from other places to stay here. In bad years, they kind of pass us by and look for those other richer areas. Good question. I have one more question. It's 5 after, so we'll take it. Any? Oh, troublemaker. Yes.
I shouldn't ask you this, but
Then
I heard everybody kind of take it whenever you showed the visual of the golden eagle feeding for babies.
Good. I wanted that response.
Years ago, your first exhibit here, you had an amazing wild horse image. It's still collected around the country. Do you have any plans to have that in poster form or framed picture form that we can buy and have this?
From your mouth to our revenuers' ears. Is Sue here today? Poor Sue. We're going to pick her on this one. We are in discussions about that. Part of that is a relationship between our revenue operators at the center and the photographer. So I'm hoping yes. That's a good question. I'm sorry. What she asked was, we've had some in the past, whether it's starting with our wild horse exhibition that we did through the Draper for the center. And the thoroughfare, that was another thoroughfare cabin. We've developed posters from there. They're just big collector's items now. I mean, they've become very popular. And you see some of these photographs that we have. I would love to turn a couple of those into posters, so we're working on it. Yeah, thank you. You should ask that question, actually. I'm glad you did. Guys, thank you so much. Oh, thank you. I won't step on my own applause, right? This leads into the next talk next month, June 7th, Thursday, June 7th. Brian Woodbridge, a close colleague of mine with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He heads up the Western Golden Eagle Task Force for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he'll be here to talk about this, why golden eagles are important and what's going on across the continent. Thank you.